many of the major early Reform leaders, including in America, the most striking example in this regard would be Isaac Mayer Wise, who is in many ways one of the Dayons, one of the leaders, one of the formers from Judaism in America in the second half of the 19th century. He was insisting that Torah was given to Moses in Sinai.
Okay.
And but not only Reform Jews continued. This is important to realize in relation to Messianic Judaism. Reform Jews continued to understand Judaism. In fact, more so than later on. In the 19th century, early 20th century, they insisted that the Jewish people are the chosen people, that the Jewish people are in covenant with God, that the Judaism is a holy nation, like a nation of priests, a holy nation, Am Kohanim Vegoy Kadosh, and that it has its obligations and its, I would say, almost manifest destiny, if I can borrow a term from American history. And they actually preserved the ethos, the internal ethos of Judaism. They preserved the notion, or they even assumed the notion that in spite of deciding at the end that the Talmud is not abiding, the Torah is abiding, but not the Talmud, they very often saw themselves as continuers of the old rabbinical tradition that was turning Judaism, the Second Temple period and beyond, turning Judaism always, reinterpreting Judaism and turning it more attuned to the demands and needs and thoughts of the day. In some ways, they saw themselves as heirs and continuers of the Pharisees, of the early rabbi. At the same time that they eventually decided that the Talmud is an abiding, that you are entitled to move away from rabbinical decrees if you find them to be not answering the questions of the day. And so in many ways, Reform Judaism continued traditional Judaism in a different way than Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy was also a new movement of the 19th century, a reinterpretation of Judaism in the name of tradition. I mean, people there to uphold tradition more even than before in the face, as you put it, of alternatives, both within Judaism and outside of Judaism. But the Reform tradition, its internal ethos is actually a continuation of the Mishnaic period in which major sages reinterpreted the tradition and reinterpreted the laws and reinterpreted or recreated the internal ethos. And at the same time, that they were willing to move, sometimes more gradually and moderately, sometimes more decisively, from rabbinical halachic Judaism of the 18th century or of their time. A lot of the changes had to do with adjusting, if you will, Judaism to the needs of now involved burghers or citizens in places like Germany or Hungary or the United States or England, in which the idea wasn't really to move out of the synagogue, but to reframe, repackage the synagogue. In some ways, some people would accuse rabbinical Judaism of being Karaites. Some accused rabbinical Judaism, in spite of the fact that many rabbis...
You mean Reform Judaism?
Yes, of Reform Judaism of being Karaite. In spite of the fact that quite a number of Reform rabbis were not crazy about the Karaites, and did not see themselves as continuing in the direction of the Karaites. They were changing, if you will, rabbinical Judaism, moderately, partially, and they were continuers of rabbinical Judaism. They continued the idea of rabbis and the idea of smicha, of ordination. And they, in fact, one of the reasons that Reform Judaism in America had already early proponents, even I would say before its time, but could really move into reform only only in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, is the fact that they needed rabbis to come from Europe who would be liberal reform rabbis to make the changes. The authority of the rabbis, the social, moral authority of the rabbis remained. The early reform rabbis were patriarchs of their communities. They were erudite. They were well educated. The first generation were well educated in Jewish law and Jewish lore and in the Jewish texts, but they took upon themselves the authority to make changes to the synagogue, to liturgy, deciding there's no need for the musaf, the repetitive, or I don't know if to call it repetitive, the repetition or the additional prayer that very often repeats the morning prayer in weekly gatherings. They decided that the reading from the Torah doesn't have to, and again, when I say they, it's not everyone and everywhere and all at once, but they decided that you can go back to Second Temple Judaism, to Mishnaic or to post-Second Temple Judaism, to Mishnaic time, and read the Torah in a cycle of 3 years, as it used to be, instead of as a cycle of 1 year.